This is my ex-girlfriend's experience while we were together, and I mainly want to tell it so people will be more cautious. My ex and I moved to a new area closer to our workplace, which happened to be in a very bad neighborhood. We were younger and just really needed a cheap apartment, and we did not know truly how dangerous the neighborhood was. She had an early morning meeting at work and needed to fill up her car with gas. When we first moved to the neighborhood, I noticed a few blocks away a gas station that looked extremely sketchy. I even made a point to say that we should probably get gas somewhere else, even though it was the closest one to our apartment. When she was filling up, she sees two men walk out of the gas station mini mart, and when they see her, they both immediately turn around and go back into the mart. She thought it was strange and continued pumping. A few moments go by and the men come back out and walk straight to her. They start chatting with her, asking where she was going and if she wants to go to a party. She reminds them that it's 6 a.m. and they just laugh and continue to try to persuade her. The position they decided to stand in really made her uncomfortable. They positioned themselves in a way where they were on both sides of her, and she felt that she wouldn't be able to jump over the car. She needed to get away very quickly. Another car pulls up into the gas and the two men just sprint away, as if they already committed a crime. I still wonder what would have happened if that car never pulled in.
I used to live in a townhouse by myself with my dog and two cats near a train station. There were often commuters who parked outside of my place and passed by through the day and night. Occasionally I had cigarettes or stuff stolen from my front veranda. I even had my next door neighbor's ex-boyfriend come to my door, telling me he had a hitman after him and he had a gun. But none of this scared me like the night I was watched. My dog lives indoors and I would take him out to use the bathroom one last time before bed. My backyard light was broken and was too high up to change the light bulb, so I always took him out to the front. That night it was around 11 p.m. and I took him out to the front. It was a hot summer night and I was mindlessly standing on the footpath when I saw movement across the road from me. Out of nowhere a man had appeared and was walking diagonally across the street away from me. I thought it was odd because I hadn't seen him come from the other direction. I continued to think about it. Where he came from was outside a house that was being renovated. I knew the owners weren't living there and thought maybe he was going to try to steal stuff. So I kept looking down the road to where he had gone. He had turned the corner down the next street. I kept watching him, and then I suddenly see his head pop up from around the corner to see if I'm still outside. This gives me the absolute creeps, so I grab my dog and go inside. I turn off all my lights and go upstairs to my bedroom, which is at the front of the townhouse and faces the street. I thought I would keep watch over my neighbor's house and call the police if he came back. I peer through my blinds, which cover sliding doors coming off a small balcony, and like clockwork, I see a dark figure walk down from the corner and down my street. He's moving towards the house across the road, and then I suddenly lose sight of him. A tree in front of my townhouse obscures my view for a moment, and then he's there. He's not just there, he's stopped at the top of my driveway. He's standing there like fucking Jason Voorhees. I kid you not. His arms were out by his sides and his legs apart in an unnatural stance. It was like he was preparing for something, like he wanted to come and kill me. My heart was racing so hard I could barely hear. I'm standing there slack-jawed looking at this would-be assailant when one of my cats comes to see what's happening. My cat slides his body between the blinds and window, further opening it, and I see this person, this man, looking up toward me. I'm thinking surely he sees me. If he does, this does not stop him. He starts walking down my driveway, undeterred and fixated. I lose sight of him under the balcony and awning. By this time, my eyes are watering in fear, and tears are streaming down my face. I don't know what to do. I go and sit on my bed. I pick up my phone and dial my dad, who lives a suburb away. He answers. I whisper to him what's happening, and he says he'll be there as soon as he can. I lie down in my bed and lie as still as I can, tears rolling down my cheeks. Pure fear, not knowing what this man was doing downstairs, and if he could get in. What if I hadn't locked the doors? And then it dawned on me why I'm lying here in the dark, crying. Turn on a light. So I did. What seemed like a lifetime, but was probably just a couple of minutes later, my dad arrived. He had an umbrella with him. I stayed on the phone with my dad while he searched the outside for the man. The man was gone. Maybe me turning on the lights scared him off. I called the police, who said I should have called sooner. Of course I should have. I don't know why I didn't. They came out with a sniffer dog and didn't find him either. I don't know what he wanted, but for a good year after that, I was so scared living there. I'm still scared, but reading other stories makes me realize I'm not alone, and we can all learn from these experiences. I know what to do if something scary happens.
This is a throwaway account because I don't want my coworkers to accidentally stumble upon this story and somehow be able to identify me. Some information about myself. I'm a trans guy. I was born female and have been physically transitioning to a male over the last 6 years using testosterone. I am 100% passing these days. I'm completely stealthed at work. None of the guys have any idea that I was a female at birth. Anyways, my story takes place when I was 15 years old. A lot of people would like to consider the 15-year-old me conventionally very pretty. I had long, dark brown, straight hair, freckles, tan skin, and bright blue eyes. This day, my mom and I were at Dillard's, looking for a particular type of shirt I needed for school. Lucky me, I went to a public school that required uniforms, and our school colors were very common, so a lot of the more affordable stores have been picked clean. I would consider Dillard's to attract a certain kind of customer most of the time. Most little old ladies smelling like powder, but I guess creeps can be anywhere. My mom and I were going from rack to rack trying to find school shirts when I noticed a man nearby. I glanced up at him and he was staring at me, smiling. He was probably in his late 30s, very tan, shiny black hair. I looked away and continued searching for clothes. I guess my mom had noticed him too because I could feel that she was tense standing next to me. We calmly walked to a rack further away to see if he would follow, and he did. He kept a little distance, but his eyes stayed locked on me and he continued smiling. He must have watched and followed us for at least 20 minutes. My mom tested him again and moved to another rack once more. He followed. This time he came directly up to us and spoke to my mom. "Is this your daughter?" My mom coldly told him yes. "She's very beautiful, a princess." My mom gave him a sharp thank you and went to pull me away. He reached for me and shouted, "I would like to buy her. I would like to buy your gorgeous daughter. I will take her with me and give her everything she wanted," all while he was still trying to grab my arm. I kept taking steps backwards, but he continued advancing towards me, staring into my eyes, still talking about making me a princess at his palace. It was all happening so fast. Suddenly, Mama Bear mode kicked in, and like lightning, she pulled me behind her to get between me and the man. She pretty much chest bumped him backwards. Through gritted teeth, she hissed at him that if he valued life, he would leave the store and get into his car and drive away. He tried to protest once, but my mom roared, "Leave." His eyes got huge and he fell into a rack of khaki pants, trying to get away. We immediately left the store, and in the safety of our car, my mama broke down in tears. I don't remember even being afraid while everything was happening. I was ready to put up a fight for my life. But looking at the tears on my mom's face made me realize exactly how dangerous that situation was.
Back in the 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I would not answer for a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed, however, when the second I answered, I heard a man say my full name in a questioning tone, like if he was asking for confirmation that it was me. Being just a kid, and thinking this was one of my parents, or someone who I could talk to, I told him that it was me. Big mistake, but I didn't know that at the time. The first phone call I don't remember much of, except that he hung up not long after I said it was me. Then some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I get an unknown call again. I didn't answer, and then I kept getting spam calls. So I finally answered, and this guy was asking me about what shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I just hung up. Not much longer, another couple of calls came in until I said stop calling me, and he responded something to the effect of, hanging up mid-conversation is rude. My dad heard me and asked who I was talking to, so I told him that I didn't know and handed him the phone. My dad asked who it was and to stop calling my number in his angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second, before getting really angry and shouting at them, before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew his name, Carlos, and it said to him, "Don't be so angry, Carles," before hanging up. Pretty soon, these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all of our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried getting the police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying there was a guy being creepy with me. The guy never called during school hours, and he usually would call at first when I was at home alone, but then soon switched it up to calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young. For a long time, we thought my uncles or their friends were playing pranks on us. He sounded mid to late 20s, and sounded sort of Latino. He never had an angry tone, and never said anything malicious, but he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sisters, my dogs, some cousins, and my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and it was never after 8 p.m. At one point I was sitting in my room and got a call, but this point it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad, and police said there was nothing to do, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember, clear as day, he was listing off video games. Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3, and he went on for a bit. I looked over to my disc stand, and I saw he was reading off the list in order that my games were, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out the window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there, and he told me something about me having good taste in games, and that we should play sometime. At this moment I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early, and we realized like idiots that we could just change my number. We changed my number, and I purged my Facebook accounts, and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later, we moved, and after changing the number, I never got any calls from this guy again. The reason I came to tell this story is because I've been getting unknown numbers calling me for the past couple of days, and I never answer them anymore. But telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about the guy, so I will be changing my number again soon as a precaution.
Hey guys, this is the first time I'm posting on the subreddit, and it's all due to a discussion I had with my bestie a few days back. Let's take it from the start. So a few days ago at night, me and my bestie were chatting and discussing certain topics, primarily horror, as we were both horror fanatics. She then suddenly asked me a question. Do you ever recall getting an ominous vibe from a person whom you just met? This got me thinking for some time, when suddenly a face popped up in my mind. This was a face that I had not recalled for the past 3 years, so just visualizing it gave me the creeps. Along with the face came the incident associated with it. This post is regarding that specific incident. This incident took place when I was in my first year of college life. Back then, I had just started my daily journey from home to college, which usually consisted of a train on the metro ride per round trip. As it was during the initial phase of my college experience, I was not familiar with many people in my college, and all my new college friends lived afar and nowhere near my daily route, so I always used to travel alone. Also, being an introvert, I neither had the interest nor confidence to convert relative strangers into friends, so I was accustomed to traveling alone and minding my own business. One afternoon, while I was returning home via the metro, as usual, a guy suddenly approached me with a college-specific question. I was a bit taken back as it was so sudden, yet I replied normally and politely as I could to his question. The guy was dressed in normal attire, t-shirt and jeans, and he looked decent as well. He introduced himself as James and said that he was a first-year student at my college as well. Then he started chatting with me about other matters, and I replied with as much enthusiasm as I could muster at that moment. Nothing in his words or attire was alarming, yet I felt something was off. The feeling was unexplainable, yet unavoidable. After chatting a bit more, he realized that his station was next, so he went up from his seat and said that he really enjoyed this conversation and that he would really like to continue talking to me, and asked if I could give him my number. I felt really hesitant at first, but firstly, I didn't want to offend this guy by saying that I got a weird vibe from him, and secondly, it somehow felt nice that someone was impressed with me on the first meeting itself. Really stupid on my part. I proceeded to give him my real name and number, and we parted ways. After that day, we started chatting by text, and as the days passed, the weird vibe started getting stronger on my part. James started off normal in his text, goofy, funny, and lighthearted, but as the days passed, he started to get a little bit more aggressive with his demand that he wants to meet up again. Now before you start having misconceptions, I want to clarify that I'm a guy, so this was a lot more weird for me to experience. He repeatedly started texting that he wants me to come to a faraway place so that we could hang out. Now at first, I was not interested because the places were really far from where I lived, so I used to politely decline, saying that I'm really busy right now. But after a point of time, he started asking me about specific dates on which I would be free. I was not really interested in the conversation anymore, so I gave him a random date into the future, and the conversation ended for that day. And would you know it, when the date actually arrived, I got a text on my phone asking me if I remember my promise to meet up, with the name of another faraway place, and a time where he expects me to arrive there and catch up with him. This was literally the last straw for me. I blocked his number and also blocked him on Facebook, where he accidentally found me while scurrying through his newsfeed one day and sent me a friend request. I truly thought this was going to be the end of the story, but no. 3 or 4 days later after I blocked him, I was outside the house doing some shopping. I had to walk long distances searching for certain products and items, so I was totally spent after an hour, sweating and panting a lot, as it was really humid and the sun was scorching. I decided to rest for some time and was standing on the side of the road. Meanwhile, I noticed 2 guys coming towards me from the other side of the road. They looked as if they were searching for something or someone, but were confused too as where they would be able to find it. Seeing me standing there without a purpose, they approached me and asked if I knew where XYZ location is. I pointed to the direction the location was, according to my knowledge, and they seemed happy and content with my answer. I don't know what it is with some people, but they start to get too comfortable and friendly after they complete their agenda, and these guys were no exception. They started asking me my name, where I lived, the name of my college, my dick size. Okay, they didn't ask me about that, but the amount of information that they were already asking of me, it didn't seem far-fetched. They also started sharing stuff about themselves, like how they ran a computer learning program, how they were scouting interested applicants, how many hurdles they had to overcome to reach where they are now, etc. After both of them babbled for many minutes simultaneously, they stopped to gather a breath and asked me to answer their questions, which I didn't even get an opportunity to give earlier. If this had happened now, I would have given them fake names and addresses. But back then, I was not careful or worried enough, so I provided my real name, college name, the year in which I studied, the area where I lived, etc. After listening to my college name, my year, my study, they seemed to suddenly have a eureka moment. They stated that one of their longtime students also studied in the same college and was also in his first year. Their student's name was James. I know what you guys are thinking. Maybe it's another person with the same name. It's not that uncommon. No, it was the same guy, the same name, the same surname. It was him, no doubt. My heart shrank after I heard his name. I started sweating profusely. My mind activated the fight or flight response. So I really felt like running away, but I stopped myself because it was a crowded street and running away felt really weird. So I stood there, shocked to my core, unable to speak or listen as the sound of my heart was clouding everything. How could this be happening? How is this even possible? This is too absurd and too improbable to be a coincidence. All these thoughts were running around in my head as their voices seemed to be playing in the distance, although they were right there, standing right in front of me. A sudden fear gripped me. What if they call and ask to speak with him? What if they say, James' house is nearby, so why don't you come with us to his house? You guys can meet and become friends. My heart pounded harder and harder, anticipating these questions from their end. But thankfully, they didn't ask any of them, although they were particularly insistent that I take his number from them. They tried to give me his number many times, but each time I politely refused. So after a point of time, they thanked me for my help and took their leave, and I breathed an enormous sigh of relief. The incident ends here, but not necessarily the creepiness. After finishing my story, my bestie remarked that this was one of the scariest stories that she's heard in a while, and the fact that it was 2 a.m. then didn't necessarily help much to subside the uneasiness. I recalled this story from 3 years ago, so I had forgotten many details regarding it. Still, certain details crept up in my mind while narrating the story. Firstly, in all the years I've been to this college, I've never seen this guy again. My college is very strict regarding attendance, so I had to go to college every day, some days even 6 days a week, and I still hadn't seen him even once afterwards. Additionally, I spent a lot of time in classes where he apparently studied, as I had some friends there, and yet, not once. Secondly, as I mentioned before, I had to block this guy from all social media platforms and also blocked his number, and I was relieved that this guy was still present in my block list. Otherwise, I would have lost my mind. However, when my bestie tried to search for this guy on one of those platforms, she couldn't find him, and she searched from top to bottom. I'm not willing to unblock him to satisfy my curiosity. It's almost been a week since I had that discussion with my bestie, and both of us are still nowhere near explaining how any of that was even possible. But I truly know one thing. This was the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't think anything will better this in the future. Update. As I said, this all happened 3 years back, so many details are murky, but from time to time, I remember something from the incident and get one step closer to visualizing the entire picture. Just a few minutes back, I found another piece, which although is not particularly important in the context of the story, but visualizing it creeped the shit out of me. It was James' smile. He used to outstretch his lips to the max and squint his eyes to the max while smiling in such a way that a few teeth are visible. I don't know if I'm looking too much into this, but revisualizing it truly sent a shiver down my spine.
Back when I was 18 to 19 years old, I was house sitting with the girl I was studying with. The family we were house sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997, when the average teen like me didn't have a cell phone. During the week that we were house sitting, it was a short break in the school calendar, which is why the family was away and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we sat for, was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a windy, hilly dirt road. There were no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I then woke up. In the morning, I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly the day before. I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. A day or two later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents, who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and the apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at around 7 p.m. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of a car behind me, tailing me really close. When I turned, it turned. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so, though cautious enough to notice in such a short distance that something weird was going on behind me. But then when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore. I felt relief, but it was short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right and there was a man inside, alone, smiling at me, slightly maniacally. For a moment I thought, geez, I should really drive with a beanie on at night so people can't see I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm all good. I pulled off and the headlights were right behind me again. So close, in fact, I could barely see them over the back of my car. What an ass, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank God my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates and shot inside. The gates closed behind me. The drama was over, I thought to myself. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He was still on the other side and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the guy from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on one side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear. And besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby, arriving for a house party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going from the basement to ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor, I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I can't fathom why I didn't put two and two together. I guess it was because I subconsciously knew that there was a group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floors, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around, and it was the guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to fuck off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I live on the third and last floor. He grabbed me from behind, held my back against his chest with his left forearm around my neck. I felt something being held against my right side. Shit, it was a knife. He led me down. I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level. This cannot end well. But I was calm. I resisted slightly. He tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. I started to become a dead weight. He started to drop on me. I was groin level, so I elbowed and it connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me, ripped the front of my button-down top, and then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me, someone taller than him. His eyes went wide. He turned and then ran. I screamed. Then I turned around to see who had come to help me. There was no one there. People came out of their apartments after that. The police were called. This was the second time that they were there that night. It turns out the other weird thing that happened that night was my dad had already called the police and they'd come past an hour before. My mom had a weird feeling all evening and it hassled my dad endlessly that something bad was going to happen to me. She had been right. As it turned out, they caught the guy. I identified him in a lineup. It turned out that this guy had a record of sexual assault. One of the victims had thrown herself out of the first floor of her apartment to get away from him, and she'd broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. It was apparently an inside job.
Last week, I encountered a pretty creepy dude on the bus. Usually I don't have to mess with stuff like that. I'm an adult male, 6'1", and pretty bulky, but this dude gave me the chills. The bus was empty and I was sitting in the last row as this perv entered and sat directly next to me. He was around his mid-40s and was wearing a checker shirt and had slimy hair. He wanted to force a conversation with me and introduce himself. "Hey, I'm George. What's your name? I want to know you." I politely denied and said that I didn't want to interact with him. After multiple tries to get to know my name, I snapped and said, "My name is your mama," and stood up and went to another seat. A few minutes later, he followed me and tried to touch my leg. I hissed at him and said that I would beat the living shit out of him if he didn't stop harassing me. Then I ran out of the bus stop at our local mall shortly before the doors closed and escaped. I actually freaked out a little bit afterwards, as I had never had another encounter like this before. I spent like an hour or so at the mall before taking the next bus home.
In 2018, I moved to a bigger city in another country, and I got accustomed to public transport pretty fast. This city is in Europe and actually known to be one of the safer places. At the time, I took a public bus to school every morning around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. My younger brother's school was also on the same route. He got off a few stations ahead of me, but I would often take him to school and pick him up on my way back, since he was only 8 years old at the time. I was 15 then. This routine went on for a year, and at some point, while taking the bus at the same time every morning, I knew the faces of people I see almost every morning on the bus. I gradually started to notice a man stare at my brother and me. He was probably in his later 20s or even early 30s. He was pretty short, skinny, glasses and a bit of a beard. After some time he would smile while looking at us, and I justified this to myself as him thinking how we were a cute pair of siblings or something. Despite that, his staring got more intense after a while, and it was not discreet at all. He started getting off at the same station as me, where my school was. Fortunately, there are a few different schools in the area, so he couldn't know for sure which one was mine. Well, at least I hope. One day I was late for class because my younger brother missed his station, so I took him to school and barely managed to catch the next bus running for it. I got on the bus, short of breath, but still happy that I made it. I sit down by the window, right by the door. I looked to my side since I felt a stare, and there he was again, standing despite many empty seats, staring at me, trying to catch my breath. I turned my head to the front again, trying to pretend I didn't notice him. I got off one stop before in case the bus got stuck on the busy intersection ahead, and I started to walk to school through a shortcut. Because I was in a hurry, I didn't notice he got off behind me as well. He probably walked behind me for about 100 meters before realizing I didn't notice him, and he decided to approach me. He creepily peeked at my right side, starting to walk pretty close next to me. He greeted me, and I awkwardly stepped away while walking ahead at the same pace. He said, "We saw each other a few times on the bus, right?" I answered with something along the lines of, "No, sorry, I don't know you." He then started asking some pretty creepy questions like, "You're in high school, aren't you? Where's your brother today? He wasn't with you. That is your brother, right?" I was flustered, so I just uttered a similar sentence again. "Sorry, I don't know you." He then made a ridiculous remark how he doesn't know me either. "So you don't want to talk." He continued following me very near my school, but after realizing that it was also more crowded in that part of the city, he gave up and made his way through one of the alleys, separating from me. I sighed out of relief and told a few of my classmates what happened. They were pretty angry at him, so they told me to call them to wait in front of the school in case this happens again. I stopped seeing him on the bus for some time after that, which made me think it wasn't his actual bus, and he's just there to stare at young girls. After the pandemic calmed down, I started noticing him again, but I don't think he recognized me. I now wear glasses, I lost some weight, and I also wear more makeup than before. He even stood next to me a few times, but I am taller than him, so I guess I'm not worthy at staring at anymore. He still stares at the girls on the bus. I've gained some confidence to be the one catching him staring at the thighs of these girls, and then staring him down in disgust. He often looks down after he notices me. I wish I had some sort of evidence to report him, but he never actually touches anybody. Thank God. I wish I could say, let's not meet again, but I still see him on the bus. But I am now older and able to spot a predator when I see one.
I'm a female, and this happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s, and I was with my family getting groceries. We had just gotten a new car, and all the settings had not been adjusted yet. The child security thingy that prevents people in the back seat from opening the doors was still on. It was a standard shopping endeavor, so I decided to stay in the car and listen to music while my family was buying water. I falsely assumed that because I couldn't open the car door from the inside, that no one else could either. The front was locked for sure, and I was sitting in the back seat. Boy oh boy was I wrong. I remember seeing a woman speeding towards our car, and tried to calm myself thinking that maybe she just saw something behind the car. That was until she ripped the door open and tried to pull me out of the car. When that didn't work, because I still had my safety belt on, she tried to get in instead, all while she was talking another language that I couldn't understand. At this point I'm panicking because my false sense of safety was gone, and I was struggling with some woman I didn't understand and trying to prevent her from getting into the car. I can remember trying to call my mom at the same time and telling her to get the hell back to the car because I needed their help. I couldn't even explain the given situation and was still focused on not letting the woman into our car, and something told my mom that I wasn't joking. Well, my father still decided that it wasn't worth rushing back to the car and calmly finished his purchase because he thought I was just being overdramatic. He was prone to saying that whenever my mental illness came through, and probably just thought I was being dramatic because of my anxiety disorder. But luckily, they eventually got to me, and only when my father appeared and pulled the woman back did she calm down and quickly went away. I was shaking uncontrollably at that point, hyperventilating and sobbing, but I remember noticing her calmly walk towards a man who was standing near the exit of the store, just watching, not doing anything. And when she reached him, they just calmly walked off. Through my panic attack, I had my parents arguing because my mother had told my father that she thought I was being serious and he had put it off. To this day, I don't know what to make of the encounter. I just know that I'm still getting anxious when I have to wait in the car alone. I tried to rationalize it somehow, and the best I could come up with was, during that time a lot of refugees arrived, and there may have been a housing place near the store, I don't know. So I thought maybe she was traumatized, had PTSD that got triggered by something, and that was her response. She also had some strange blisters on her hands that I thought it may have been injuries, but looked more like skin infections. That idea would also work with her overall appearance and her speaking a different language. But the fact that she instantly backed off and calmed down when my father got there, after pulling her away, of course, and the man was just watching still doesn't make sense to me.
This happened to me when I was 19, which would mark this in 2003. I was born and raised in a small town. I was pretty sheltered throughout my childhood and teenage years. I was always warned about stranger danger, but had never really been in a bad situation before. That is, until this happened. After high school, my best friend Jennifer moved to LA to attend USC. I would say that at this point in my life, I've never ever been to a truly large city before. So when I went to visit her, it was a bit of a culture shock for me, especially things like the subway, bus, and train systems. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going with no help from anyone, and it was overwhelming to me. Luckily, I had made it to our dorm okay from the airport. I stayed for a week or so, and we had a great visit. Jennifer and I were always together, which made navigating public transit fairly easy and comfortable. However, on the day I was to head back to the airport, she had to work. I didn't want her to worry, and I felt fairly comfortable after riding the bus and subway throughout the week. I said my goodbyes and managed to get on the train to the airport. The first stretch of my trip to the airport went fine. I think I had even printed off directions. In case you've never used the LA train system, it travels through a lot of smaller neighborhoods before it hits more recognizable, typical, this way to the airport signs. At some point, I became convinced that I was going the wrong way, that I had no idea where I was, that I was going to miss my plane. I was basically panicking. I got off at the next stop and found the map of transit lines, studying them like they were written in Greek, and that's when he came up to me. Now when I think about what he looked like, it's a blur. He was big, that I remember. He easily had 100 pounds on me, but he was a security guard. He was very friendly, asking me if I needed help. He seemed to genuinely want to help me, and so when he asked me if I wanted to ride to the airport, which was very close, he said, I accepted. I was just grateful to get where I was going. For me, at the time, the security guard was as good as a cop. I know now this is not the case, but I implicitly trusted him because of his badge and uniform. The first odd feeling I had was the way he threw my suitcase into his trunk, just tossing it in and slamming the trunk. Then I got into his car. It was filthy, cigarette butts and trash strewn throughout. I remember not knowing where to put my feet. I had to put them on top of piles of garbage. Still, he had a picture of a little kid dangling from his rearview mirror, so I thought it was okay, it's not a big deal. He's a good person. So he starts driving, and I have absolutely no idea where he's going, but of course I wouldn't. However, after a while, it's clear he's not going to the airport, or at least not the direct route. I try to stay calm and ask him questions. He asserts that he knows where he's going, that this is the fastest secret way, and stuff like that. We end up in a pretty abandoned business area, a place for freight and other businesses that were either closed or empty. There wasn't a single soul in sight, just deserted stretches of road. He begins circling the same streets, retracing where he's already been. At this point I'm freaking out, but I don't want him to know how scared I am. It's here that I feel like I wake up to the bad position I'm in. He had these reflective sunglasses on and was smoking cigarette after cigarette. After a while of me asking where we were and where we were going, he stops altogether, refusing to answer me. After a long period of driving in silence, he starts to ask me about my underwear, how long I've been wearing them, what color were they. At first I played along, trying to be cool, I guess. I made up the color they were, saying that my boyfriend wouldn't like the conversation, stuff like that. I tried to placate him, not wanting to make him angry. Then he told me he would give me $100 just to see my underwear. He began to reach over and try to touch me, my knee and thigh. I told him no, I'm not interested. but he didn't stop. At this point, I'm fully aware of the danger I'm in. The only thing I wanted was to be able to get out of the car. I thought about how bad it would hurt with how fast we were going. I begin to tell him that if he just wants to drop me off, I can have someone come get me. I remember trying to make him think that none of this was a big deal, that he could just leave me, and that I'd be fine. I just wanted to leave the car. I kept trying to remind him that I had a plane to catch, that I was worried I wouldn't make it. Though I imagine I sounded calm, I know that in my fear, I was shaking, saying everything. It's hard to remember how long we drove around in what felt like the middle of nowhere. I was leaning far into the side of my passenger seat, thinking I would just have to jump out if it got bad enough. And then, after a final refusal to let him see, touch, or smell my underwear for money, he speeds up. We leave the area we were driving around in. He drives me to the closest train station quickly and pulls into the parking lot. Needless to say, I've never been so happy to see a train station. I quickly get out of his car and make sure people can see me. I can remember thinking that was important. He gets out, pulls my luggage out of his trunk, throws it out onto the ground, calls me a bitch, and then speeds off. I did get to the airport and make my flight. I didn't tell anyone this story for a long time because I felt so stupid that I had put myself into this now so obviously dangerous situation. I still feel this way, but now I worry that I should have told someone, that maybe he did this to someone else who didn't get so lucky.